Hey there, welcome to the DFS Build NBA Edition. I'm Kevin Roberts, ready to go over the Game 3 showdown slate for the Celtics and Mavs. The Mavs are in a 2-0 hole going back to Dallas. It's not looking great. Boston is definitely favored to win this series, as everyone should have expected based off the regular season. That said, Boston comes in as a 2-point underdog in this game, and the game is a 212 total. So I'm not super convinced that we should buy into that line. I definitely anticipate Boston winning, and I kind of think this series is going to be swept, but that doesn't really have much bearing on how we're going to proceed here because the Mavs are still going to put up a fight. They're probably going to lose, but they're at home. So I think they have a little bit of an edge here. And also, there's a possibility Kristaps Porzingis will not be at full 100%. He exited the game in game 2 with his calf issue. So no word yet that it's anything serious or is going to limit him. But, he's only played 21 and 23 minutes in his first 2 games back from injury. And if at all he is, not going to be 100%, that is obviously going to be worth monitoring. For now, I'm just going to proceed as if it's a non-issue, and we can, if we're going to use him, we can probably bank on him getting a little bit more run as he gets more comfortable. Just note that obviously, he's been dealing with that, and if he's going to be limited or less than 100%, then obviously he is a risk. All right, so let's just look at the captain area first. And I'm not going to spend too much time with the captain. I'm going to slide over to the utility to kind of break down any guys that really want to play. But I will note the ownership right now. We do have ownership a day out here. And Luka's obviously coming in as a top chalk at 18%. I would not be shocked if that is inflated considerably after his huge game 2. He had triple-double, 72 fantasy points, and that's just what he's capable of doing. So I definitely want to play Luka a lot. I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing and sliding him over to utility a good portion of the time. But obviously, if he can drop 70 fantasy points, putting him in captain makes quite a bit of sense. So it's going to be kind of a bit of a split for me there. I will like him at captain a lot from rolling out a lot of lineups. And certainly in play for single entry still, even because the ownership, you just really have to work to get different if you're going to eat him there. And then go over to utility quite a bit personally. So obviously Jason Tatum looks good. He has not really shown much of a ceiling in the series so far. But he's averaged 52 fantasy points per game against the Mavs on the year. So I definitely think he's going to pop off at some point. I don't think he's even scored more than 18 points in a game in the series. 16 and 18. So the shot is not falling. But he had 12 assists in game 2. He's had 9+ rebounds in both games. So the peripherals are absolutely there. And for a guy that averages almost 27 points per game on the year, Tatum is going to get going at some point. And I would not be surprised if it's game 3 here. But yeah, so I don't really need to do a big sales pitch for Tatum. He looks great at utility, and he's cheaper than Luka, so he is a fine pivot at the captain spot for sure. Kyrie Irving still coming in with a lot of ownership as the 3rd highest owned captain. A little bit surprising considering he's got a really tough draw with Drew Holiday and Derek White. Even if they're switching, it's not like he's got a bad defender on him at any point. And Boston's defense in general is good. So no surprise that he's not shooting very well. 38% shooting from the floor last game, 31 in game 1. That's led him to score 12 and 16 real points, 21 and 26 fantasy points. That's not what you're paying for. And what I've been saying all along all playoffs about Kyrie is if he gets going and scores, he'll be totally fine and he'll be a good play. But if he doesn't, you're going to really see his floor. So he's really risky. And the downside with Kyrie is even if he does go off, it's just not a really crazy ceiling. In the last game against the Timberwolves, he had 36 real points and only had 50 fantasy points just because the peripherals are not amazing. Luka is soaking up a lot of those numbers. Doesn't put him out of play because it's a showdown slate, but I'm a little bit less interested in Kyrie than I have been previously. I will say if the ownership was lower, I'd be a lot more interested in Kyrie just because he's 0 for 8 from long range in the series. And one thing Boston does is they let you take threes. And eventually that's going to, backfire because, Dallas can hit their threes and Kyrie specifically. So he certainly is still a decent play, but based off of his recent form and the ownership, I probably would be a little bit underweight on him. Let's see. If we're looking at ownership, Jaylen Brown looks good. Nothing wrong with that. Derek White is pretty interesting just because he's the cheapest captain so far here and coming in only 7% ownership. 38 fantasy points in game 2. And he's just been giving you, for the most part, that nice 38 to 44 fantasy point production for games and games now. So he's just a rock solid play. When we're comparing him and Drew Holiday, I still like him more than Drew Holiday just because he should be a little bit less owned, especially with Drew popping off last game. What did Drew get? 26 real points. Yeah, 26 real points, 50 fantasy points. This guy just continues to go the opposite way I project him to go. Although for the past like 4 games, he wasn't really going crazy. He had 37 or fewer fantasy points in all those games, and then he finally just went nuts. So you can certainly play Drew Holiday. He plays basically the entire game, and I don't know why his usage continues to be where it's at. He took 14 shots last game, but he hit 11. This is not sustainable. He cannot shoot this well. It cannot keep going. So I'm going to continue to bet against him overall. I will still use him because if you look at utility, he's still 7K, which is not egregious for a guy who plays that much. And for whatever reason, keeps hitting all of his shots and gets decent peripheral stats. So certainly in play, certainly could still captain him just like with Derek White. But I'm going to be underweight because eventually Drew Holiday is going to show himself a little bit and he's not going to be hitting every single shot he takes. PJ Washington. I mean, I don't feel like I'm wrong about PJ Washington here because he's having decent games. He's just not getting it done across the board to really pop off. In the last 3 games, he's had 25 plus fantasy points each time, and he's had double figure scoring and 7+ rebounds. You would think if a guy's putting up 12 points and 7 rebounds, he'd have a better fantasy outing, but he hasn't even cracked 30 fantasy points since game 5 against the Timberwolves. So a little surprising considering he's been shooting the ball fine. He's been scoring. He's been getting rebounds, but the other stats just haven't been there. He's not really hitting threes yet in this series. So if you think that's going to change, which I do think it will, eventually he's going to get hot again at a really high level and maybe even get a double-double here. I think PJ Washington's a really interesting captain play once again. I mean, he's just got to hit eventually. A utility, he remains really good play, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But I think he's really interesting in captain at 5% ownership. One person who'll be really, really interesting is going to be Porzingis. Obviously, you have to monitor his status just because he exited that game early. But, I'm not that concerned about it. I just if he's a full go, then we can use him. And right now he's coming in at 5% ownership for the captain, even though he's projecting better than PJ Washington, and obviously he's going to project better than Al Horford, who's right below him here. 5% ownership, Porzingis, with that ownership possibly even coming down, with people worried about his status. That's pretty appealing to me for sure. And then as we go down to Al Horford, Derek Lively, Derek Jones, these guys are they're kind of grouped together. Like if Porzingis is randomly out, then Al Horford would look awesome, and his captain ownership would inflate. And he'd be a really, really good utility play too. I did say Derek Lively was in for a bounce back game, and he sure did not. He had 19 points. He didn't struggle with fouls this time, but he could not get a bucket to save his life. The Celtics have been defending the interior very, very well. Interesting to see if that translates to the next 2 games in Dallas. So I wouldn't be shocked if Derek Lively did actually, for real, this time bounce back and get it going a little bit. He's cheap enough, and we know he has a little bit of a ceiling to the point that I'm okay with taking that risk. But so far, Gafford has been the one that actually did bounce back. I also liked him a little bit, especially at his price. He's coming in at 5K flat. He's a little bit more expensive than Lively, but so far, he's been the better option of the 2. No fouls in the first 2 games, which is very, very surprising. I don't know if that's sustainable, but I like to see that. He had 23 minutes in game 2, 26 fantasy points, 1 rebound away from a double-double. So obviously the potential is there for him in this series. I like Gafford a lot, 5K. If I'm going between him and Lively, I think I'm going to go Gafford, but both look like really good plays. As far as value goes, Peyton Pritchard, 3K flat. I mean, what he's going to get maybe 12 to 15 minutes. It's not really enough for me to get excited about. Sam Hauser, 2.6. He's going to get about 10 to 15 minutes. Again, not super excited. So I'm not like, these are fine utility shots in a showdown slate, but I'm not really rolling them out at captain. I will mention Maxi Kleber yet again. He had 19 minutes in game 1, 16 minutes in game 2. He had 4 fouls though. So I'm wondering if game 1 was the blowout and game 2 was foul trouble, and maybe, just maybe, Kleber can work out in game 3 at 2.4K for a guy that, he can rebound, he can block, he can hit threes. If he's going to push for 20 plus minutes and can stay out of foul trouble and the game is close, I do think Kleber is a really good play. So I would have a sprinkling of him in captain, but I would just eat him up in utility for sure. All right, let's go over to utility real quick to touch on anybody I really didn't go over and just look at the ownership in general. Obviously, Luka and Tatum and Kyrie are all going to draw a lot of ownership. I will definitely be getting exposed to Luka and Tatum a ton. Kyrie would be the one I'd be a little bit underweight on in utility. I'd still go after him a little bit in captain just because. I mean, it's Kyrie Irving. Eventually, he's going to get going. I would imagine, unless this series is just a sweep and he just never shows up. He has not had a good history against Boston, so I will not be going at him a lot. I'll be very, very underweight overall, especially because he's going to be owned. But if and when I do play him, it's mostly going to be at captain, just so if he pops off for 40 real points, I'm going to benefit from that at a very high level. Jaylen Brown can be used across the board. No issues there. Drew Holiday, I'm going to bet against Drew Holiday going off again. I mean, he's still fine at 7K to the point where if he gets you 35 fantasy points, that's not going to hurt you or anything. That's totally fine. But I'm going to bet that he's not going to be the captain, and I'm going to bet that he's not going to hit 11 of 14 shots again. So if that ends up being correct, then I can gain a little bit of leverage on him by maybe playing Derek White or maybe just going with PJ Washington. Derek White, again, looks really good. I mean, and to be clear, Drew Holiday looks totally fine in a vacuum. But if ownership is going to start flocking his way because he went off for 50 fantasy points, I'm going to go against that a little bit. But the guy of this trio I like the most is PJ Washington. He's been playing well. There's nothing he's done that has made me not want to use him. If he can hit a couple more threes, get a block or two, and just get a few more rebounds to get to that double-double, he's going to pay off. So at 6.2K, really good utility play, nice little mid-range option. But I like him again in the captain slot just because he's not going to garner ownership, and we know he does have a little bit of a ceiling. 40 minutes last game too. We know he's going to play basically the entire game. So I like that a lot. We get down to the Derek Lively, Daniel Gafford, Derek Jones Jr. Situation here. These guys are not pulling a lot of ownership despite being really good value plays. I already said I like Gafford over Lively just because he's been the more productive, more reliable guy so far. If ownership is going to reflect that as well, you definitely can go the other way and go with Lively. He's $600 cheaper. But right now, I trust Gafford to get more minutes, and I think he has a clearer path to better game, and we know he has a ceiling too. So I think he is the better play of the two, but both are totally viable. Derek Jones Jr. at 4.6K. The best thing about Derek Jones Jr. is that he's cheap. And let's see, I'm trying to pull up his game log. He's cheap. He's going to get minutes. He had 29 minutes in game one, even a blowout, 32 minutes in game two. So 30 or 35 minutes is what we can expect. He was decent in game two at 21 fantasy points, but at 4.6K, you shouldn't be expecting the world, and you shouldn't really be disappointed if he gets you anywhere between 20 and 25. Although he's capable of providing considerably more if he actually hits his shots, which he hasn't really done yet in the series. 1 for 5 shooting from long range. And we know he can get busy with blocks and steals too. If he wants to show up in that regard, he could be quite a good play. So 26% ownership for Derek Jones Jr. I have quite a bit of interest in him at 4.6K. Not really a guy I'm super excited to play in the captain slot, but definitely a guy I like at utility. And I would probably at this point play him over Derek Lively just because if I have that much interest in Gafford, and since those guys are splitting the center minutes in Dallas, I think most of the time it makes sense to just choose one, and one of them is probably going to outperform the other. And often I'll do an ownership play on that. Whoever's more owned is the guy I won't play, and I'll go the other way. But right now it's kind of split ownership, so I don't think you're gaining so much leverage to use that as your reasoning. Porzingis is very low owned right now, which to me makes him a really interesting captain play. And obviously, if he's going to be 28% owned across or 24% owned across the board at 8K flat in utility, he's certainly viable in utility. I just think if he's going to crush to the point where he's really going to matter, I think he makes sense as captain, just because he's 5% owned captain, and utility he's not exactly cheap at 8K or 8K. So I do like him in general, just because he's low owned, but I prefer to use him at captain if I'm going to slide him in there. Horford remains just totally fine at 5.6K. You can sprinkle him at captain, but I prefer him as a utility play. With Porzingis either kind of limited or just kind of on the fence or not 100%, I think he is a perfectly fine play Nothing wrong at all there. Not really excited about the Boston value. I mean, if you think it's going to be a blowout, you can always go with the Boston guys, but they have not been producing, so I'm not really excited to go there. The Dallas value is probably where I'm going to go. I'm going back to the well, Maxi Kleba. He's coming in at 23% ownership, which isn't low for a guy who's 2.4K, but it's kind of low for a guy who I feel like if he can get there is a really big key to scoring a takedown. Just can he avoid foul trouble? Can the game stay close? And can he actually hit some shots? Because he's going to get minutes, and they need his size. Josh Green at 2.8K, 14 and 20 minutes. He doesn't do anything when he's out there. I'm not super interested in him. Jaden Hardy at 2K flat. He had 2 minutes last game, so I think we might need to get off the Jaden Hardy train. And Dante Exum got 10 minutes last game, so maybe we did a flip-flop there. It's a showdown slate, so you can still entertain the idea of Jaden Hardy, but if he's suddenly out of the rotation, pretty hard to get excited about him. And I think we'd have to lean on Exum there. The cool thing is none of these guys are really getting ownership right now, so you can kind of play around with that. If you're going with multiple lineups, you can just keep swapping out that last spot and hope the lowest owned guy, pops off and you have the right combination and you get there. All right, so hopefully that helps you out a little bit. If it does, please like this video and give our channel a like here to help the community grow, and alerts you to future videos as well. We put out MLB, NBA, and NFL videos anytime we can. All right, thanks for watching and good luck.